Welcome to Comfort Crime with Lindsay Sanchez, a cozy mystery podcast where no actual crimes have been committed. Today, we'll continue Death at Dogwood Lake, a novella about Georgia Lennox, whose perfect first date turns into a perfect nightmare when she discovers a dead body, and instead of finding romance, she's pulled into a murder investigation where hometown secrets run deeper than the alpine lake where it all started. If this is your first time here, please start with Episode 1, Chapter 1. There's a link to it in the show notes. For everyone else, we'll continue to Chapter 6. But first, an update. You know that feeling when you have a perfect image of something in your head, but getting it out into the world is like trying to describe a dream? That's been me lately with book covers. My cover designer and I are so deep in the creative trenches, and I'll be honest, it's been quite the journey. I'm definitely learning as I go. The good news is I'm getting better. I'm getting better at translating the scenes in my imagination into actual workable design directions. It has been harder than writing a book. It really has been. The even better news, I think my designer knows what he's doing, and I'm learning to trust his expertise more and more. Here's where it gets fun. While studying cover trends and design principles, I couldn't resist playing around with some concepts myself. I jumped on Canva, and I even experimented with some AI-generated covers just to explore the possibilities. Some turned out surprisingly well, and others, let's just say they'll remain in the experimental vault. I can't wait to share the final options with you and get your input on which ones capture the story best. Stay tuned for the big reveal coming soon in the newsletter. I have a feeling we're creating something pretty cool. And if you're not yet getting the newsletter, what are you waiting for? Join us. The link is in the show notes. Last time we read Death at Dogwood Lake, Chapter 5, where the evidence starts pointing in an uncomfortable direction when Jake's father becomes the prime suspect. Georgia can't shake the feeling that something doesn't add up. Between her curiosity and her keen eye for details, Georgia begins piecing together a puzzle that gets more complicated by the hour. Owen Meadows, with his wet hair, clean bike tires, and conflicting alibis, looks very suspicious. But the picture coming into focus is incomplete. Before anything is going to make sense, Georgia needs to find that college hat. And now on to this week's chapter. Death at Dogwood Lake, Chapter 6. It was too dark to tell for sure who was behind the desk in the office, but there was something familiar about the outline of his body and the way he stood. Georgia took a chance. "Jake, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," he said shortly, but he didn't seem angry. They were doing the exact same thing. Jake must have noticed the absence of the hat, just like Georgia had. He'd probably noticed the clean footprints and shiny tires, too. That would make him wonder the same thing. If Owen Meadows was at the lake, where was the hat? He turned on the lamp on the desk beside him, the soft glow illuminating both their faces. "Are you looking for the hat?" Georgia whispered, taking a few steps closer, but keeping her promise to herself that she wasn't going to touch anything. "It's not here," Jake said, rifling through a few papers and opening and closing drawers so half-heartedly that Georgia guessed he'd already looked there. "It's so weird how it disappeared." Georgia was relieved to finally be talking about it openly with him, with anyone. Could it have just sunk to the bottom of the lake? Jake shook his head. The water is so clear, the officers would have seen it. Did they see it? And maybe just not tell the two teenagers they were trying to get away from the crime scene? We would have seen it. We were looking. Someone took that hat. Jake said it like he knew it was true, and like he knew who was responsible. Why? Georgia worked up the courage to ask the real question. Why do you think it was your dad? She took a breath and pressed on before he could respond. I know he and Tom weren't friends. Jake snorted, like that was the understatement of a year. But your dad is a nice guy. He's not a killer. Part of me knows that's true. Jake shook his head, looking at the ceiling like it had answers written on it. If something happened with my dad up there, it was probably an accident, but... He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. He just didn't know how. You can tell me, Georgia said. Jake took a deep breath, let it out, and closed his eyes. I think my dad and Rose are having an affair. He said it quickly, spitting out the words like poison. Out of a million things Georgia would have guessed Jake was about to say, that would have been the last. What do you mean? She asked, not bothering to hide her shock. I know, Jake said. It sounds crazy, but he keeps lying about where he's going, and he and Rose have been friends for so long. I know it's crazy, but he always ends up at her house. Does your mom know? I don't think so. You think that your dad was at the lake with Rose and that Tom found them and they got in a fight? Georgia pieced together the puzzle from Jake's perspective. Jake looked at his hands and sighed. I don't want to believe that. I just don't know what else it could be. They've been friends for a long time, Georgia said. She didn't want to minimize Jake's concern, but she had a hard time believing that after everything they'd been through, including the death of her husband, that this was how it would end up. At first I just thought he was going there because the nursery's been in trouble. But he kept going and lying about it. Why else would he lie? There was so much to unpack. The nursery being in trouble, the secret meetings at Rose's house. But first, how did Jake know? You followed him? Yeah, Jake said. It was an accident at first. I was working a shift with Tom, and he sent me to get Eric. We were short-handed that day at the nursery, and he wasn't answering his phone. I knew my dad had a meeting that morning, but when I got there, his bike was in the driveway. So you assumed? Georgia trailed off, not wanting to say the words. No, not at first. But I got curious and I started noticing. He'd missed my game that morning for a meeting. He said he was going to be at the college all day. When was this? Georgia could see how hard it was for him to talk about it, the pain in his eyes. She wanted to reach out, touch his arm or hold him, let him know he wasn't alone in this. But after this morning, she didn't dare. She didn't know where they stood, so she settled for a week. I'm sorry. As bad as this looked, Georgia also knew Jake was jumping to conclusions, or at least that there was more to the story that he wasn't telling her. Either way, if this was his only evidence, there could be 100,000 reasons Owen Meadows was in Rose's house, the house of his best friend's widow. Most of them not at all scandalous. Should we go? Georgia moved toward the door. Jake didn't. What's the matter? It was a dumb question, considering the confession he'd just made and the morning they'd had, but something else was bothering him, something he wasn't saying. He shuffled the papers on the desk again. They're going to sell it. The nursery? Yeah. Looks like my dad had an offer and he's already signed it. Jake handed Georgia the paper. I thought he only owned half, Georgia said, taking the paper from Jake, ignoring her promise not to touch anything. Is Rose willing to sell? Maybe that's what your dad's been doing at their house. Maybe he just didn't want anyone else to know about it yet. Jake stayed silent, watching her as she scanned the contract, waiting. Georgia finally got to the bottom of the page, skimmed over legal terms that she didn't understand or care about, to the name signed at the bottom. Owen Meadows was the only name next to the owner. What does this mean? Georgia rescanned the document for any bit of information she might have missed. Anything that proved this document was not what it seemed. He cut them out. Jake confirmed her fears. Within the course of one morning, the man Georgia had known all her life as her best friend's funny and kind father had turned into a liar, a cheat, and maybe a murderer. On the buyer line, Pineville Nursery was neatly printed next to a signature. They're selling it to the nursery in Pineville? Georgia said. Maybe your dad was there this morning after all. You don't get it. Jake shook his head. It doesn't matter where my dad was before or after Tom Hardy ended up in the lake. All that matters is that he was there. Jake was in shock. He must be. He had to be, if he couldn't give his own dad the benefit of the doubt on any of this. He was leaping to wild conclusions that were completely unfounded, unless he was hiding more from her. What aren't you telling me? Georgia folded her arms. He didn't owe her anything, she knew that, but he'd led her along this far. It really wasn't fair to keep things from her now, not when she was in so deep. The nursery didn't go to Rose, the part Matt owned. Jake paused, like even halfway in, he was still deciding if he should say it. Who did it go to? Her son. Jake looked at Georgia with a pleading look, like he was begging her to understand. So it went to the son. That's a little unusual. He would have been, 13 at the time? But fathers pass their businesses down to their sons all the time. And then she understood, as realization hit her like a gut punch. It would have been despicable for Jake's dad to cheat a widow out of her half of her husband's business. And it would be so much worse if he cheated her son, a naive boy who likely looked up to him as a father figure. Georgia pulled out her phone and took a picture of the paper, the white sheet with black words that was turning her world upside down. What are you doing? Jake grabbed the paper, put it back on the desk, and reached for her phone. We can't have a picture of that. A noise near the door cut him off mid-sentence. Jake quickly turned off the light and ducked under the desk. Georgia tucked herself into the nearest corner and squatted down, hiding in plain sight. If whoever was opening the door turned on the lights or looked directly at her, she had no hope. They would see her just as she'd seen Jake. The door opened. A shadow walked in. Georgia didn't recognize this body the way she had Jake's. She couldn't place the tall frame and broad shoulders. It was a man, that much was clear, or a very, very large woman. Whoever it was big and wearing flip-flops, and they knew exactly what they were looking for in the dark office. They didn't turn on lights or hesitate or linger. They went straight to the desk in the darkness, grabbed what sounded like papers from the desktop, and left, leaving the door wide open in their wake. There were only 2 men who had any reasonable right to be in this office. One was in jail, and the other was dead. There was a 3rd person in this mix, someone unaccounted for. Whoever the mystery man was, Georgia had 2 guesses. She'd put all her money on the 2 people they knew were already involved. Either Rose's son Eric, or whoever in Pineville was buying the nursery. Either way, Georgia had 2 questions. Where were both of them this morning? And did either of them have a Dogwood Community College hat? It wasn't clear how, or if, this 3rd man might be involved. Maybe he and Owen Meadows were in the scheme together. Or maybe, despite the lying and sneaking around, there was hope for Jake's dad after all. As Georgia snuck out of the office, she hoped it was the latter. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a mystery-loving friend or leave a review on your favorite podcast player. Most of all, thank you so much for being here today. I loved it, and I'm already excited for next week.